My name is John Lobell. I teach architecture at Pratt Institute. This is a recording from a lecture in my Frank Lloyd Wright course given in spring 2014. This lecture looks at some parallels to Wright and some architects influenced by Wright. If you look at an architect like Mies, Mies presents us with an approach that others can use. So we can say they're not as good as Mies, but you can walk down Park Avenue or 6th Avenue or now anywhere in the city and see Miesian glass boxes. With Le Corbusier, there are people who learn from his principles. There are people who imitate Corbu, maybe not always to happy effect, but with Wright it's more difficult. Wright certainly is influential on us in things like the open plan, the American ranch, suburban house, but if you see a building that looks like Wright but it's not Wright, this is terrible. That's not right. You're going to feel that's not right. Somehow, so there's, after Wright died, a group of people who had been sort of his office continued it in something called Taliesin Associates. And they were good architects. Eventually, they closed the office. But what are they going to do? They're going to, each of their buildings is going to be judged. Well, that doesn't look like Frank Lloyd Wright, so what business do you have being Taliesin Associates? Or that does look like Frank Lloyd Wright. When are you guys going to get your own style? So there's no happy way to do that. So I'm not going to show you architects who were influenced by Wright, but maybe associated with Wright or parallel to Wright. So we're going to look at some other architects for a moment, then we'll get out early today. So we'll start with Green and Green. So Charles Sumner Green and Henry Mather Green grew up in LA and went to MIT and were presented with a Beaux-Arts education. And they felt, this is not right for California. This is not who we are. When they came back, they developed their own style that is part of maybe what's called the craftsman style. So there are other things that look like their work. It's called the craftsman style. There's some Japanese influence, but there's about half dozen of these buildings. They're very clearly green and green is what they are. And the most spectacular is the Gamble House, and it's for one of the founders of Procter & Gamble when he retired. And so it's in Pasadena, and actually, if we keep going down the street, right about there is the Frank Lloyd Wright's Millard House. So, and then if we go over here and we look over the cliff, there's Richard Neutra's The Lovell House. So it's a good neighborhood for prominent houses. It uses, so it's in a desert climate. And we don't see desert here because they pipe in a lot of water to get lawns in LA, but it is desert climate. Now desert climate means very hot in the day and very cold at night. There isn't enough moisture in the air to hold the heat. So it's hard on climate. It's it's cold at night in the winter. In the summer it can stay hot at night. So a whole bunch of things start to happen. One is it uses shingles before, like fiberglass, modern insulation. These shingles are 3 feet long, so they are overlapping quite thickly, and that becomes the insulation. Today we just put fiberglass in there or something like that. We have these extreme overhangs in the roofs in order to throw shade on the building, keep direct sun off of it. In the winter, the sun's lower, it can hit the wall and heat it up. And we have what's called sleeping balconies. So we have doors opening up from the bedroom. You just throw your bedding out and you sleep out here. It's before air conditioning. It's so hot that you got to be outdoors catching a little bit of breeze to survive. I don't know why people want to live there, but It's, I guess when people get older, they like to eat. They're not metabolizing enough to make their own. It uses this device of the structural members for the roof project out. That's purely ornamental. Gives it this craftsman look. You can see from the shadows how much they're projecting. It's not a good idea because the tips of these are going to get wet. You don't want the tip of wood to get wet because that's like a straw. That's where all the grain is. It'll just suck the water in. So some of these have been cut off and replaced, like the last 3 feet, and some of them need replacing. But that's purely ornamental. Now, let me back up. Wright and Green never met. So this is a parallel to Wright. And we see here something that's reminiscent of the open plan. But it's not, because despite the fact this is very open, you just flow from one space to another, the corner's still here. See, Wright would have left this wall out and would really flow from one space into the other. These things have spectacular staircases and incredible interiors. So we start at the door. This is Tiffany glass, a tree of life. Come in, entrance hall. It's incredible woodwork. So come through the door, the stairs right here, and then we come around into the living room, dining rooms this way. So we come into the living room, fireplace, more Tiffany glass. All these lamps on leather straps are Tiffany glass. Here's the stair. It's incredible woodwork. And then everything's grooved and notched together. So here is the glass fire. The fireplace with glass tile around it is right here. We have this beam over here. So we have these two pieces of wood. We want them to act as one piece. So we strap them together with these iron bands, and we put these pegs in here, because if they can slide past each other, then they're not working together. But these pegs stop them from sliding, and so make them structurally work together. So it's just, it's not important to the structure. It's just sort of showing off the craft quality of how it's made. So here's the peg, and here is the iron band. And I'm going to turn down the lights just a bit more so we can really appreciate these little photographs. Now, Green are very into the wood, the materials. They get a call from the lumber or a telegram or the mail used to come twice a day, so you could write a letter in the morning and get there in the afternoon. This is before they might not have telephones, but they get a call from the lumber yard. We just got this mahogany log in from Thailand. They rush over. We got a client who wood we could get out of this, our current project. So it's very hands-on, very much into the craft. And when we look at this woodwork, maybe we're reminded a bit of Frank Lloyd Wright. Here we are in his own house, his stair. But Wright is very deliberately making crisp, rectilinear edges to show us that this went through a saw. It went through a machine. So the wood is cut by machine. We're in the industrial age. Here, it's actually a little bit later, the edges are rounded. They want to show that this was done as a handcraft. So they are not celebrating the machine the way Wright does. They are celebrating handcraft. Now they did, let's go back here. They did half a dozen of these. This is the most spectacular. As I said, it was for Mr. and Mrs. Gamble. He was one of the founders of Procter & Gamble. And by the 1950s, they were too old to be living in the house. It was too big, required upkeep, and wanted to move to something smaller. They never put it on the market, but word got out that it might be for sale. $25,000 bucks. So an agent brought somebody by, and they look at it, and oh, they're nice and everything. And as they're leaving, the wife of the couple looking at the house says, "It's so dark." And the husband says, "Don't worry, we'll paint everything white." And Mrs. Gamble hears that and says, "This house is not for sale." And so it was given to USC. It's a museum, and USC maintains it. It's a guest house for lecturers and stuff like that. Everything is the way Green Green did everything, as Frank Lloyd Wright often did. All the silverware, all the linen, and there are these huge drawers, huge flat drawers that have all the linen in it, etc. It's all still there intact. And they like to have people living there because you want to be flushing toilets. You don't want to let it sit there for a year. Plumbing will go bad. So you really have to use these things to keep them in good shape. Now, by the 1920s, this had gone out of style. People found it too dark. So they would do houses where instead of this wood panel, they would have white infill. But it was out of style. It was too antique, old-fashioned, too much wood, too dark. And they ran out of clients. They split up, went on to other things. But one of the brothers did a house in Big Sur. So when you drive down from LA, there's a point along the coast where, you're driving down this windy road on the cliffs of the Pacific Ocean, and you look down and, oh my God, there it is. This is, it's not a green and greenhouse, it's a greenhouse. I don't remember which one did it. But again, it's just incredible handcraft, attention to detail. Okay, so Green and Green sort of paralleled Wright. You can see a similarity between their shingles and Wright's own shingle-style house for himself, his first house. You see a difference in their showing off the handcraft quality of the work, where Wright wants to emphasize the machine quality of his work. Another architect associated with Wright is Bruce Goff. Bruce Goff was a friend of Wright's and knew him when he was in Arizona. Wright was a prodigy. He'd done a building before he was 20, done a church. And Wright did weird stuff and came into prominence in 1951-57. He did the Bavinger House. He lived in Oklahoma, and most of his work was in Oklahoma. So the Bavinger House is in the form of a spiral, like a seashell, or snail shell. And so there's a mast in the center, a stone wall spiraling out from that, cantilevered out from the central mast are these pods where the sleeping is, where your bed is. The walls are made out of stone, encrusted with, you like to put in the stone big chunks of raw glass. So there was a lens factory nearby, made lenses, and they had these blocks of glass, and when they got rejected, it was thrown away, so because there were flaws in them or whatever, and he'd pick them up and they'd be in there along, like big chunks of glass along with the rock. Famously, this is from a very conformist era in American history. He didn't live in a house like this, and so the Bavingers were ridiculed, but they charged 50 cents for a tour of the house, which in today's money would be like 10 bucks, and paid for the house. So if you wake up in the middle of the night, you don't fall out of your pod with the kids. Here's some of the glass. and then there'll be some in the walls. Here's one. Here you can see the glass sort of lighting up the wall. These are the cables that run through the wings in bomber airplanes. So during World War II, you know, you'd work the controls and you pull this lever, it pulls a cable and it changes the flap on the wing. Today, it tells the computer to run a little server motor so it's called wireless flight. It means that actually in the old days, the brakes initially in your car were cable, and then they became hydraulic. And it's interesting how much stuff in the car, you know, like when you press the gas pedal, since I'm older and I'm used to carburetors, I think in terms of you press the gas pedal, it pulls the little lever that opens up the flaps in the carburetor. So the more air flows through and you go faster. Well, now when you press the pedal, it's not doing anything. It's just telling the computer on the fuel injector what to do. And it has a feel to it to emulate the feel that gas pedals used to have, because that's what people are used to. But it could be totally different, because all it's doing is telling the computer what to do. But anyway, so he bought those cables surplus. All the stuff after the war, there was all the surplus stuff of every imaginable kind of stuff left over from the war. So that's where these cables came from, for the roof. Here's some of that glass. Now, he had one really big-time client, and that was Bruce Price. So the Price family was an Oklahoma oil pipeline family company. And later, the Price Tower that Wright did was for them. So we'll be talking about that again later. But they were Goff's clients. So for Bruce Price, he does this big bachelor pad. It was written up in Playboy magazine as the most incredible bachelor pad. And then he got married. Goff kept adding on to the house. So this is the house. It now belongs to the University of Oklahoma. It's like, what are we going to do with this? Trying to maintain it. So here's the living room. And it had a conversation pit. That's what they had in the 50s. They made a hole in your living room. So this becomes built-in seating. And so this carpet is your seating. And then on the wall, this is carpet, but then when it gets to the wall, it's goose down. The feathers glued onto the wall. Along here. And then this wall back here is coal, big chunks of coal. Coal is very shiny and black. So it's big chunks of coal alternating with chunks of that glass. And this is plastic wires hanging down, making this sort of a lighting thing. Built-in TV. Now, architects usually have rich people for clients because it's rich people that are willing to have weird houses. Your ordinary middle class person doesn't want to be the only one on a block looking like an idiot. But apparently in Bartlettsville, Oklahoma, they're willing to do that because there are these Bruce Goff houses all over the place. So we can just see here, this is an ordinary suburban house. And then there's this thing next door. Even the dog's embarrassed to walk past this thing. This one's in Florida. It looks like somebody landed a flying saucer. This is a piece of one. Now, let's go back to one of these. Let's pick one. Let's pick this one. there's a quality to paintings that you could call painterly. And even when you get to modern art, if you look at a Jackson Pollock drip painting, put it next to a Monet Impressionist painting, yeah, they're both paintings. But then when you get to Andy Warhol doing a soup can, it's like, that doesn't look like a painting anymore. So there's a quality in buildings that they look builderly. So when Louis Kahn is this modern architect, but then he's doing these concrete waffle slabs. It's like some waffle slabs. It's like something out of Rome. He has this heavy concrete. We're in a modern age. We can build with, quarter-inch walls. And so Venturi really picks up that idea of making buildings that are not builderly, that really do use cheap, modern materials. Well, Bruce Goff was doing it before any of them. So he has a church in which there's a chandelier. And what he does is he buys a whole bunch of 5 and 10 cent store aluminum pie plates. And then he punches a hole in the middle, and he has this fishing line come down and ties a knot, puts on a pie plate, ties a knot. So he has this whole chandelier of aluminum pie plates. And you look up and you say, oh my God, it's aluminum pie plates. Or they used to have in the dime store ashtrays, big, heavy, blue glass, sort of cut very crystal-like. So he buys a whole bunch of those and puts them in a grid on the front door. And you say, oh my God, looks like a grid of old 5 and 10 cent store ashtrays. Or he's got in the Price House, in Bruce Price's study upstairs, he's got this just an aluminum storm door, like you get at Sears. And it's this big sheet of glass. He takes that sheet of glass, he takes Duco cement, and he has this huge collection of cheap plastic beads. He makes all these patterns and designs out of beads on the I mean, how simple is that? So he doesn't have any qualms about just doing these simple, unbuilderly things. Now, Bruce Goff was a great teacher, University of Oklahoma School of Architecture. This whole generation of people, of his students, are really interesting, interesting architects. One of his students was Herb Green, and this is called The Turkey House. It's by Herb Green. Okay, so one more, last one. This is Paolo Solari, just died. And Solari had been prominent in Italy when he was very young, did this ceramics factory in Italy. He comes here, and in the 1960s, he's out in the desert in Arizona, not far from Frank Lloyd Wright's Taliesin West. He takes a bulldozer, and he piles up a mound. Then he throws rebar over the mound, and then he pours concrete. Then he goes inside and scoops it out. So this is Casante. It's a whole complex, his store, his home, a whole labyrinthine complex of these concrete forms. And he, for years, made a living selling these cast ceramic and bronze bells. So you buy these wind chimes at Casante. But he also made these incredible drawings, had this fantasy of something he called Arcosante. It's a city of the future, it's supposed to be ecological, and it's this vast fantasies. Maybe it reminds us a little bit of Archigram. Then he started building it. So it was never really meant to be seriously the city, but there's a whole bunch of sort of experimental structures. And he had a summer program. You go out there for 3 weeks in the summer as a student, and you work on building stuff, and then there's concerts and lectures and events and stuff like that.